Christy, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's S'more the Merrier and Den Sweet Den. I started by stamping out my images in Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock, and I'm going to be coloring with my Copic markers. So for my bears, I wanted them to be like black bears or really dark brown bears. So I chose E44, E47, and E49. Started with that E49 and laid in some shadow. On this first little guy, I did it down the left-hand side of his body since he's facing toward the right. And then I blended that out with the E47, and then I'm going to use the E44 for my highlight, and I make sure that I use that over his eye so it's still nice and visible. And then I'll move on to my sleeping bear, and for him I'm going to add my shadows more on the right hand side since he's facing toward the left, and on the back of his little tail, and also where his head is overlapping his front arm a little bit. So once again, coloring darkest to lightest and adding in that mid-tone next to really blend out the edge of that E49 so it isn't, you know, just like a dark black ring or dark brown ring around the outside edge. I want everything to look nice and smooth so they look really fluffy. So I'm going to just make sure that everything is nicely blended, and then I'll move on to my mama bear. And since she's also facing more toward the left, I'm going to do her shading on the right. So I just used this S'more the Merrier stamp set in a card very recently, and I wanted to play with it again. I just love campfire scenes. I think they're just so cozy and nostalgic and just scream summer. So I wanted to use it again, but I wanted to make it different. You know, I didn't want to just use the critters from S'more the Merrier. I wanted to do something else, so I decided to go with these bears. Since you're always warned as a camper, you know, to watch out for bears, I thought it would be fun to give the bears their own little campground so that nobody gets to chase them off. They get to enjoy their s'mores all for themselves. So I just thought that would be kind of fun. So I'm coloring toward the center of the body and realizing I'm going to need one more shade for her since she is a larger image. And also the other two, you can't really see their bellies, but on her, it's very visible there. So I just wanted to have a little bit of a softer color. So I pulled in E43 for that. And I also am going to use the E43 and E42 for their muzzles. So just added a little bit of that E43 on the outer edge and then blended it out with the E42. Next, I wanted to color the chocolate, and I decided to go with some different browns. I didn't want to use the same ones I used on the bears. So this is going to be more of like a milk chocolate, which is more traditional for a s'more. On my other card, I used dark chocolate. So I used E57 and E59 for that, and I'm also going to do the melted chocolate on the s'more that's over on the left. And then I'm going to use E53, E55, and E57 for my logs in my campfire. I did the E57 down at the bottom, blended up with the E55 and then the E53. And I forgot to do the other side of that first log, so I just quickly colored that in. And then I'll also do the little s'more and the marshmallow on the stick using the E55 and the E53 to get them perfectly toasted. Leave me a comment down below how you like to have your marshmallows toasted. I always like to have mine just kind of like crispy and golden brown. I don't want it black, but I also don't want it, you know, like super pale. It needs to have a little bit of color on there. I also use the E50 to just blend that out, and then use the E50 for the raw marshmallows and the ends of the logs. So next I'm going to pull in some reds. I'm using R24, R29, and R39. And I'm going to do the center flame of the fire and also the graham cracker box. In my previous video I did it blue, so I wanted to change things up. So I used that E39 first, and since they're both pretty small areas, I just went ahead and colored them both at the same time. And then I'm blending out with the R29 and filling in with the R24 for my highlight shade. For the middle flame of the fire, I went with orange and I picked YR04, YR07, and YR09, again coloring darkest to lightest, with the darkest down toward the bottom and the lightest at the top. And then for the center stripe of the graham cracker box and also the outer portion of the fire, I'm going to do that in yellow, and I picked Y13, Y15, and Y17. So for the graham cracker box, I'm putting the darkest in the two corners and blending toward the center. And then with the flame, I'm just doing it like the others with the darkest at the bottom and the highlights at the top. And then for the chocolate bar, I decided to go with a blue wrapper. At least here in the States, when you buy chocolate like truffles or whatever, usually the milk chocolate is in a blue wrapper and the dark chocolate is in a red wrapper. So I chose B21, B23, and B26 for the label, and then C1 and C3 for the tinfoil wrapping. For the graham cracker on the s'more, I decided to go with E30 and E31. So I added a little darkness on the outside edges with that E31 and blended out with the E30. And then finally for my marshmallow bag, I went with BG10, BG11, and BG13. For the label, I'm going to do that a bit darker, so I'm using that BG13 first and blending out with the BG11. And then for the rest of the bag, I'm just going to outline the edges with the BG10 so that it looks white. Then I'll take a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and go over the eye of my one little bear who has his eye open to make that nice and bright and shiny, and trim these images out with their matching dyes. For my background, I wanted to create a night sky, but I wanted to do something totally different from my previous camp out card. So I'm taking a piece of a Lawn Fawn Blue Jay cardstock to be my night sky, and I'm going to blend on some Mermaid Lagoon Distress Oxide ink using the Lawn Fawn Cloudy Stencil to create some nice little clouds in the background. So I'm just turning that stencil so I can get a different cloud formation each time, and then starting with that ink blending tool on the stencil and pressing down harder as I lift off, and then kind of getting soft as I go up so I get a nice little fade before I hit the next section of clouds. And then I'm going to take some starry colors, watercolors, and I've added some water to this kind of medium gold shade, and I'm going to flick that all over the background to create the look of stars. And I really love how this stands out on that beautiful blue sky. So I'll set that aside to dry, and then I'm going to take the Lawn Fawn grassy border and the puffy cloud border and die cut that out of some cilantro and noble fir cardstock. I'm also going to die cut the trees from the forest backdrop. And then I'm going to take some red cardstock and some striped red pattern paper from the Really Rainbow 6x6 pad, and I'm going to die cut the different parts of my camping tent from these pieces of cardstock and pattern paper. So I have the background and the front flap out of the chili pepper, and then the outer part of the tent out of the pattern paper. So I'm going to glue that striped pattern paper on top of the darker red background, and then I'll add the tent flaps right over top. And I'm using my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue, which is still fairly new to me, but so far I'm really enjoying it. Has that super fine nozzle that's just really great. And then I'm going to glue the cilantro over part onto the noble fir background piece of my little trees. To make sure that those trees stand out against the grassy background, since they're both the same colored cardstock, I'm going to add a little bit of Distress inking to the top of that grassy border using some Mowed Lawn Distress Oxide ink. And once I have that edge defined the way that I want it, I'll press some of that onto my work surface and add a little bit of water, mix that up with a fine paintbrush, and then I'm going to add a little splatter detail to that grass as well, just so it matches that background. Just creates a little bit of texture and interest in that panel. So I'll set that aside to dry, and in the meantime I'm going to work on my sentiment. I'm stamping on the rest of my cardstock panel that I used to die cut my images using walnut ink, and I'm doing this sentiment that says, "Everything is s'more fun with you." Then I'll pop my card base in my MISTI, which is a piece of Lawn Fawn craft cardstock. I'm going to continue using the same ink, and I'm going to do the other little bear from Den Sweet Den, and the sentiment "Have a Berry Cozy Day" is also from that. And then the little s'more again from S'more the Merrier. So I stamped that down a few times to make sure I had a good impression. The nose didn't seem to want to stamp correctly. But then I'm going to start assembling my card. I'm going to take that background and adhere that to my card front. Just making sure that the edges line up nice and straight. And then I'm going to add my puffy cloud border, which is going to be some bushes in the backdrop of my little camping scene. And that's going to really help it look like we're deep in the woods. And I did use the middle size of those puffy cloud backdrops for those bushes. Then I'm going to take my grassy border and I'm going to line that up with the bottom edge of the card. Then I'm going to bring in my layered trees, and I'm going to bend that card just a little bit so I can slip them back behind that grassy border. So I put the two largest ones toward the inside, and then I'm going to take the two smaller ones and put those on the outer edges. I just used my tent to make sure that I had them positioned correctly, and I ended up wanting to shift them just slightly more toward the outside edge so that they're still nice and visible and aren't like too hidden by that tent once I get it on there. So I'm just adding those smaller trees, just slightly overlapping the larger trees. And then I will take my tent and add that to the scene as well. But before I glue it down, I want to add the little baby bear inside. So I'm just tucking him under the edge so it looks like he's back in there. And I'm going to take the whole s'more and add that next to him as well. So he went into kind of like a little sugar coma and fell asleep in the tent, while the other guys are going to be still hanging out outside. But he just had too much sugar, so he's in for a nap. So he's going to go back in that tent, and I'm going to put that right in the center of my scene. And then I will bring in the rest of my images for the outside. I'm going to take the candy bar and tuck that into the mama bear's arms, so that she can be holding that. She's going to be helping the other little baby bear prepare his s'more. He's roasting the marshmallow. She's got the chocolate ready. So I'll put that fire down in front, and then I'm going to have her next to it. Of course, she's a little bit back from it, you know, because you don't want to get too close to the fire. and then the baby bear is going to be holding the stick, roasting the marshmallow. The stick was kind of too long to tuck into his hand though, so I ended up tucking a good portion of it back behind him. Otherwise it would have been like sticking in the other baby bear's eye, and I just didn't think that looked right, so I just stuck it behind his body and ended up making it look like the stick was just a little bit shorter than it is. I shifted the mama bear just slightly forward so that I could tuck the marshmallows back behind her, or a little bit overlapping her, but just kind of off to the right hand side to help fill in that corner. And then I'm going to add the graham crackers over on the left side, and I'll have some of the extra marshmallows there as well between the graham cracker box and the baby bear. And then that last little marshmallow I'm going to add down in front of him. So he just has a few at hand ready to make some more s'mores. And then I'm going to take that sentiment and I trim that down with an everyday sentiment banner. I'm going to trim off one end of that banner so that it can be flush with the left side of the card, and added a bit more glue to that so that I can adhere that down at the top. And then I die cut the tent pegs out of some craft cardstock. First I had them overlapping the strings, but then I thought it looked better tucked behind the strings, as it looks like they're tied around it. So I just did that, one on each side. I decided not to add any stickles, since this could also be a masculine card. That mama bear could just as easily be a daddy bear. But it does have that beautiful gold splatter paint up at the top, and there is another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this fun campfire scene. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. I post new ones every Monday and Friday. If you're interested in any of the products I use, you'll find them listed and linked in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day. Bye-bye.